Friends, hello, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up. So Making It Up is my show. It's my podcast. I used to call it video conversation because, I don't know, I think I kind of got annoyed by the word podcast, and you realize, like, well, this is basically a podcast, even though it's on video. But this is the show where I talk to other writers, and it's a deep dive conversation, not so much a discussion of in individual books. I know, certainly I have a lot of writers on when they have a book that's just recently released, and they're looking to promote it. And that's great because, it's a good vehicle for me getting guests on the show because PR teams are pitching to me about their clients who have these releases. But I want to know about them. I want to know about their journey. I want to know about, when did you think about writing? What are the struggles? I want to know about this kind of the psychological aspects of it, culminated with whatever successes and failures they end up having. That's what's interesting to me. So I typically go into the show fairly blind. Obviously, I know who my guests are. I know what they've done and certainly what they're promoting. But I don't prepare any questions because I want to just hang out and just, hey, we're sitting down and we're talking and I want to know about you. And that makes it interesting for me. Hopefully it makes it interesting for you. Before we get to today's guests, couple notes. My new thriller, Tell Me What You Did, is out. So if you haven't read it yet and thrillers are your bag, please check it out. It's getting a lot of great press. And I've been very grateful for the success that it has kind of gone through in this first few months of publication. And for all of you aspiring writers out there, I do have a company called Unbound Writer, and that's at unboundwriter.com. And I do one-on-one coaching. I offer writing retreats. I do seminars, and we are putting together some more self-guided online writing courses. Just a couple notes. If you go to that website, you're going to see I've got a 4-hour commit to your novel writing class this spring, 2025. And just a note, if you are struggling and you are thinking about hiring a writing coach, I offer complimentary 20-minute Zoom calls. Let's just jump on a call and get a sense of one another, see if we're a good fit. Tell me what issues you're having, and I'll give you some advice, and maybe there's an ability for us to work one-on-one with each other. All right. So today on the show, I had a great conversation today. I'm kind of feeling energized by it because it was very heartfelt and it was very fun. I had on the show Bob Johnson. So Bob is a graduate of the Iowa MFA program, which is obviously the high water mark for MFA programs. The catch is he graduated in the 70s from it, and he spent an entire multi-decade career in broadcasting where he didn't really do any writing at all. And upon retirement, Bob kind of just felt now is the time, and all these stories kind of came to him. So he started writing a bunch of short stories, and that culminated in his recent release, The Continental Divide, a book of short stories. And that release got a glowing review from the New York Times. And just, we talk about this in the podcast, but just not to downplay this, it is incredibly difficult for any book to get reviewed by the New York Times. There's a massive supply and demand equation involved. I know these reviewers have stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of books of which they can get to a handful. And, when you're talking about a book of short stories from a previously unpublished author to get a glowing review in the New York Times, those are long odds. So, and obviously very, very well deserved by Bob. But it's just an amazing accomplishment. And so we just had a great conversation about his life, about the inception of stories, and about kind of going through the process of getting this book published. And what his pull quote that he uses from that Times review that's on his website is, the New York Times wrote, "Think Flannery O'Connor meets Quentin Tarantino." And I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. What an amazing pull quote. So he's very happy about that. And it's also given him a got him an agent who is now looking at him to write a novel. So that is what he's facing down next. But I couldn't have had a more pleasurable conversation and really a stellar making it up portion of the show. You will see how quick Bob is when we do our storytelling. You're going to love this one, folks. This is my conversation with Bob Johnson. So where are you? Where do you live?
I live in South Bend, Indiana.
Oh, my daughter. That was a potential. Is University of Indiana in South Bend? Is that
No, that's in Bloomington.
Bloomington?
In,
Okay.
in South Bend, it's Notre Dame.
Oh, okay. My
The Fighting Irish.
Yeah, my daughter
Hmm.
applied to law schools at both Indiana and Notre Dame. So but she's going to go to Ohio. That she just decided this week. So
What you gonna do? Yeah.
what you going to do? Have you
Hmm.
born and raised in the Midwest in Indiana?
I was born in Middlebury, Indiana, which was actually named after Middlebury, Vermont, where Bread Loaf is located.
Hmm.
And I don't know the history of that very well. But I grew up in the Middlebury Goshen area, and I now live in South Bend. The only time I was really out of the area is when I went to grad school at Iowa in the late 70s.
Right. Right, and we'll definitely I want to touch on that for sure. But growing up, were you the creative kid? Were you the storyteller? Were you wanting to do something like that? I mean, obviously you eventually got your MFA, so it didn't come later in life. um,
No, it came about the right time. I mean, it came at more or less the normal time for one to get an MFA in my late 20s. I was the creative kid in that I tell this to people. I was ADD and I wasn't able to concentrate at school.
right, which was undiagnosed back then, obviously.
I had no idea. I
Right,
mean, I
right.
was
You were
just I
you were called hyperactive, probably.
and and I was called bad and I was called lazy and I was called lots of things by both teachers and parents. And it was a distressing childhood in that respect because I knew that I was clever, but I didn't get the grades and I couldn't study and that sort of thing. But I was the creative kid. And when it came time for like a school talent show or something like that, I was always the kid with the idea.
Right,
And I tried to write some when I was young, when I was in middle school and high school, but I didn't know what life held for me in that respect.
right.
That all came along later.
Isn't that wild as children how you go through something and you have no realization that like, oh, other people struggle to do this that comes easy to me, and vice versa. I mean,
And
I
vice
remember
versa.
even being able to like write a witty little poem very quickly, and it was just no problem for me, and I didn't see it as any huge feat. But then other kids were just like, I don't know how you can do that. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, and then I look at somebody who's like great in math, and I'm like, yeah, that's hieroglyphics to me.
Oh, just yeah, exactly. It's Chinese. And the yeah, no, I was that kid. I could do that. And but of course what I wanted to do was to dribble to have a left hand in basketball. I wanted to have a jump shot. I wanted to, and I didn't have any of those things. And
Yeah.
so I looked at those people with the same kind of awe and lack of understanding that you're describing.
Right, right. And it's but and I think it's so wild because we also don't we can look at all at that, and then we also can't appreciate the talents we do have. And I think
No.
because of that, a lot of times, I mean, I didn't start writing at all until I was in my 30s. I had zero training, zero aspirations. But you look back and you think, this is, I think, what you were meant to do all along. But
It's
you didn't
it
have the self-awareness over it.
No, you don't. You don't. And it is it's clearly it's well, what I like to call it, and I worked a variety of jobs. I worked in broadcast television for 30 years.
Hmm.
And I also taught high school and middle school and college. And all of that was my work. No, it was my job. because what I'm doing now is my work,
Right.
and it feels great to say that.
Right. And that's, I work with a lot of writers in terms of coaching, and that's one thing I see such a struggle with is those people who are really throwing themselves headfirst into writing, but refusing to think of it as work and or a career because in their mind it's just a hobby and it's who am I to be a writer and
Yeah.
it's kind of this self-diminishment that perpetuates itself into I think a lack of success because you've never given it the gravity that it deserves even if you're not making a dime from it.
When I was as I say, when I was at Iowa, other students would say, I have to work this afternoon. And it took me a little time to realize they were talking about they had to go right. I have to work today. They didn't mean I have to go to Starbucks
Right,
or something and sort of, pay the rent.
right,
They meant I have to go right. And I always loved that term ever since then. I
yeah,
love to say that this is my work.
right.
And my wife, she's been such a partner, and she refers to it as my work. Here I am in retirement,
Right.
and I'm not going to make a dime from this,
Yeah,
but she refers to it as my work.
yeah,
Bob's working this morning, and
right.
she doesn't mean that I'm out cleaning the eaves troughs,
Right, totally.
which I couldn't do anyway because I'd fall off the ladder and then it would be a disaster.
But you're totally right. I write an hour a day, and I typically go to a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Every 7 days a week, I go. Between 7:30 and 9 in the morning, somewhere around there, I drive to this coffee shop and I sit down and write for an hour. And if my partner calls me during my drive, I say, yeah, I'm headed to work,
That's
and
wonderful.
it just does feel, and it doesn't feel like a put on. It feels like, yeah, this is what I do, and you have to treat it that way. So what when you started, you're talking about being a struggling, student. Did you have collegiate aspirations?
Well, I went to college. I went to a small college, again, Goshen College in northern Indiana, because I lived near there and I had some family members that went there. And I had a familial connection to Goshen College. And I never took a writing class. I didn't take literature classes beyond what was required of me to get my degree. I actually majored in Spanish
Hmm,
in secondary education
hmm,
because I had been to Latin America and I discovered I had kind of an affinity for language.
hmm.
And I said, "Oh well, I know what I'll do. This thing that I can sort of do, which is speak Spanish, I'll teach." And so I taught middle school upon graduation, and I hated it. I hated it. I mean, the notion of speaking Spanish and liking the culture and liking the food and all that, and teaching 30 recalcitrant
Right,
12-year-olds
right. It's lost on
Spanish
them.
in
Yeah,
it was there was no I hated it,
right,
and I felt like they wanted to kill me, and
right.
in a sense they did want to kill me. And like I would bring plants to class to brighten up my classroom, and when I was out they would staple my plant leaves together with my
Oh my
stapler
God.
and things.
So
You
because
know,
so this was a required course, so it's not like people were electing to take Spanish and had this,
well, no, it wasn't required. They were electing.
but
And
a
they
language
thought,
was probably required,
yeah,
maybe.
maybe it was. And I was young. I was 22 going on 14.
Yeah.
And they thought I was cool and young, and they wanted to be in my class for one reason or another. But I just hated it. And then later on in life, I taught English in high school, and I hated that too,
Yeah.
just because of the chaos and because having to sort of the chaos of the classroom, having to keep control of things so you can you know, do the right job, do your work. And it was very, very difficult. But I taught college a little bit too, and I like that better
Yeah.
because the students were there, they were paying to be there, and they were more committed to be there, and it became more of a fruitful, sort of rewarding work.
Yeah.
But boy,
But
yeah. So that kid that went off and taught junior high Spanish stuff, I did not have writing aspirations then beyond, as I said before, knowing that I was kind of clever and creative. And I knew that I had to get some other kind of work than what I was doing.
Right.
So if you want me to go on, then
No, 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 please.
I became a head resident of the dormitory at Goshen College that I had been a student in. I became the head resident, and I was married at the time to my first wife. And so there I am sitting in this dormitory apartment while the students on the floors above me were smoking pot and generally screwing around. And I'm 22 years old and I want to be with them. I want to go
Right,
upstairs and
right,
smoke pot too.
right. You weren't annoyed, you were jealous.
Yeah, I was jealous. And it was during that time that I began to write. I have a book here in my house. It was one of those little books that have blank pages.
Yeah.
And I began to try to write stories, and that's what got me started down the road.
God, it's so interesting, because not to make this about myself, but I look back in my 20s and there was a period of time where I was working in hotels and I was in San Francisco living alone. And that's a very lonely, it's kind of a pretty low, I didn't know anyone, big city kind of a thing. And I just did have these crazy creative impulses, which manifested itself in things like, hey, let me read books kind of for the first time on my own, like without being
Sure.
assigned to them. And I remember going to like the used bookstores and trying to find the fattest books I could find so I could get bang for my buck and getting into like James Clavell, for example, and be like, oh my God, this is amazing. But then I also remember like I want to sketch. I want to learn, and I want to watch all the movies that I've never seen before that are supposedly classics. And that also included, I remember now, writing really terrible 3 to 4 page stories, maybe 3 or 4 of them. So not very much. But just there's something about that age, and there's something about, and you kind of alluded to it, the isolation, wanting to be with the other kids, but you're here, that I think if you're a creative person, it's just like, I've got to put my brain somewhere that's
Yeah.
natural to me. And I don't have a smartphone. I don't have cable. It's like, what do you do? And you do go through these massive creative bursts. And then I just went back to work. I never thought about like, oh, maybe I should, because again, you look at it, you're like, this is a silly little thing to pass my time. This isn't a career. But with you, obviously, it did manifest into a desire to do graduate work in writing.
It did. I went to Indiana University for the Writers Conference there, and I was 25. Actually, I turned 26 the week I was there.
Hmm.
And I ran in and I won the prize for the best manuscript down there. And I had no idea. I'd written only a couple of serious stories. And my professor down there was named Leonard Michaels, who was a short story writer and novelist back in the day. And he said to me, "You got to go to Iowa." And I said,
What's Iowa, right?
I can't. Well, I kind of knew what Iowa was,
uh,
but I said, I can't go to Iowa. He said, I'll get you in.
yeah.
And then
Wow.
later on, he said, "You're an intellectual." And I said, I don't have no, I have no, I have no literary background. I
Right.
have no academic background. I got C's mostly. What do you mean? He
Right.
says,
You've
yeah,
never been called an intellectual before in your
no,
life.
never. And he says, well, you're a natural intellectual. And I said, I don't even know what you mean. And in fact, Carter, I went off to Iowa then. He got me in. I went off to Iowa and I took that same ADD kid with me
Right.
and I farted around a lot.
Right. Right.
I made friends with a couple of kids in a film class I took as an elective, and we made dumb, silly films. And when I wasn't making movies with them, I was playing pinball.
Right.
And I didn't even write as much as I should have then. But I was very green and very young, but something obviously stuck because it
Yeah,
kept.
and that was kind of the time, right? It's kind of adjacent to the Beat Generation, and you think about Kerouac, and none of those guys were serious about the work, but they probably would never have told you that. They would have probably shunned you if you had called them an intellectual.
And they probably would have shunned me if I said, "Hey, I'm going off to get my MFA," because
Right, right.
Charles
Oh,
Bukowski and those guys.
right,
What? Yeah.
right. Well, let's talk about Iowa for a little bit because, I've certainly had, no small number of MFAs on the program, and of course some of those have gone to Iowa, and the parallel to me, I think a little bit is, so I went to Cornell Hotel School, which was kind of the Iowa MFA of hotel programs. So I know kind of the gravity associated to that. And then you go through it and you're like, all right, was that like sublime? But was Iowa at the time, even at the time, obviously, I think it was the place.
It was the place, and I was gobsmacked to find myself there.
Right.
And I found myself there with brilliant, brilliant, brilliant people. And as I said, I was so green. I had written only a handful of stories. I had no literary background. They could have they if I heard that John Cheever was coming to speak, for example,
Hmm.
and I didn't know who John Cheever
Right.
was.
Right.
And, I'm ashamed to say that now because he's one of my North Stars,
Yeah.
even today.
Right.
Um, I did know who John Updike was, who came and taught classes, and I know who Kurt Vonnegut was, who came and taught classes. But yeah, Iowa was the
Amazing.
place.
Yeah.
And I always tell my wife and other people that I wish I had taken better advantage of it. But my wife always says back to me, maybe that path, whatever it was, that knock it around, not taking it seriously, and then taking it seriously, sort of in the same breath, and finding myself rubbing shoulders with these people out there. Maybe it was the path I had to take
Right.
to
Right.
one day publish a collection like I have.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of people look at missed opportunities or rejections as just that, as just kind of what a waste, but I totally agree with you. I'm like, all of this leads somewhere, and, maybe you needed 75 rejections to get an acceptance because maybe it wasn't ready or whatever those signs are.
Yeah.
But I think you have to be of a certain age to start having that kind of insight and appreciation. And I don't think that probably happens before the age of 45.
Well, yeah, it
You
took
just don't
longer
know
than
any
that for
better.
me. Well, actually, yeah, it took longer than that. I tell people that when my wife Cindy and I, when I was in the TV job, which was demanding, it was somewhat creative. I managed something like 30 people and had new sets to build and $1 million budgets to manage and the like. And it was very, very trying.
Hmm.
But every New Year's Eve, Cindy and I would sit in a bar, it was often the same bar, and she would say, "What are your resolutions?" And I'd say, "Well, I want to write. I want to start writing again." And this was when I was 40, 45, 50,
Yeah.
55. And but I often thought, but I don't have anything to write about. I don't have, well, then I retired and discovered I had a gajillion things to write
Right.
about.
Right. So, going back to the MFA, which is obviously a highly specific degree, and most people, I think this is a guess of mine, but most people graduating with the MFA, they are going to go straight into, if not writing, then writing adjacent, journalism, whatever. But that wasn't your path.
No, it wasn't. I had again, I was clever. I always had the idea.
Uh-huh.
And I was graduating with my MFA and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And the, the department assistant named Connie Brothers got in touch with me one day near my graduation and said, "Hey, in Cedar Rapids, there's a TV station. At the time, it was WMT TV. It was a CBS affiliate. Said they're looking for someone who knows a little bit about filmmaking." And I had taken the film courses, and also he was creative and knows how to write. And would you be interested? So I applied, and they gave me the job right away. And that got me started. I had a baby on the way,
Right,
and
right.
I needed income.
Of course.
And that got me started in television. And what does Hunter Thompson say about TV? It's the long, dark hallway where um, good men die like dogs. It's sort of true.
Yep.
It was a hard world, and I came back and taught a little bit in Indiana, and then I got the TV job in South Bend where I toiled for another 28 years. So no, that wasn't my path straight out of my MFA experience. But I always chewed my arm off because I wasn't writing,
Right.
and yeah.
I mean, but was it ever the thing where you're just like, I mean, it sound and you've used some very specific words describing your employment, toiled being one of them,
Yeah.
difficult, and I'm very much conceptualizing very long hours. But was it ever a thing where you're like, all right, I am going to go into my office and pour scotch and write for an hour, almost as therapy, or it was just like I just didn't write?
What I did was go into my office and pour a scotch. No,
And just
no.
close your eyes and
Yeah,
decompress.
yeah. Actually, no, Carter, I didn't do that. And again, I got to mention the ADD thing again. The
Mhm.
job was so demanding and it was so exhausting. It took so much of my bandwidth that there was no way that I was going to write otherwise. I
Right,
wasn't going to get up at 5 in the morning and write before I went to work. And I
right,
wasn't going to come home and
right,
write when I got home
right,
because I was too tired. So
right,
no, I had to put it all on the
right,
back burner.
right,
I
right.
never did.
Why,
I
while dealing
almost
with
didn't
ADD.
write at all in the entire, I almost didn't write at all in the 30 or so years in between.
That's amazing. And what I kind of love about your story, Bob, is that, and we've said this time and time and time again on this show, because I've seen it evidenced from people of all different ages, and certainly including myself. If you're a writer, it's going to come out of you one way or another at some point. And
Well, I think
you might
so.
be kicking and screaming against it, but it's going to happen if that's what you were meant to do.
A lady asked me on a podcast a few weeks ago, she says, "Why do you write?" And I said, Because I'm supposed to, because I got nothing else to do."
Right,
And all the other stuff was
right,
imitation. It was making a buck.
right,
All the other stuff was
right,
that.
right. And yeah, and that's not to say you can't find joy and moments of fulfillment in while making money. But because my personal story is I started writing when I was 33 on one day, and it stemmed from me just posing a riddle to myself because I was bored in this continuing education class, and that turned into this 400-page manuscript. And you spend some time with the curiosity element of that, like, why did this happen? This isn't this yes, this is a terrible manuscript, but this is meaningful. I wrote a book out of the blue. Should I pay attention to this? And hopefully when you have those moments, you don't think about the realities of writing and publishing. You're just like, no, this is
I
what I
don't,
need to do.
there's a famous scene in Sleepless in Seattle
Hmm.
where two women talk about you have more chances of getting killed by a terrorist or getting struck by lightning than you do of getting married after 40. I don't know if that's true, but I heard similar analogies when I was coming up in the writing world that you have more chances of, getting killed by a mad bull than you do of publishing a story. And I didn't care. I
Right,
didn't care
right,
about the odds. The
right,
odds, I didn't even think about it. I refused to think about it.
right,
If people shared that with me, I said, yeah, whatever.
right,
No, I
right.
didn't think about it. Because I
But
had I had my I had work to do. I had my job to do, and that was to write anyway.
right, right. And that's how you
Mhm.
know you're a writer. And I think it's funny when I work with students and we go through the exercise of why do you write? I don't let them off the hook easily. We have to really explore it. Like, and your kind of answer is, and I don't think there are really any wrong answers, but your kind of answer where you can't really tell why, you're just like, this is just what I do. That I think is the purest form of a writer because it's just like or any other art form. If you're drawing, it's like this is what I was made to do, and that means you don't think about the financial aspect of it or the odds. That all stuff is secondary, and that all comes because you're just constantly doing it and you're learning and you're getting better. But you only do all that because of that innate kind of desire to do it, I think.
I had a friend named Louise Marburg who has written three collections, and I'm a very good friend with her. We met at Kenyon, and I asked her one time what she said to me one time. She said, "You don't want to be famous from this, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't think so. I don't expect to be famous." "Well, you don't want to get rich from this, do you?" And I said, "No, I certainly don't expect to get rich." And then I said to her, "Well, why do you write?" And she said, "I want to be read."
Yeah.
And it struck me as such a simple answer. I want to be read. Well, what I want to share this thing that I have to do. I want to share it. She's not writing a journal. It's not something that she keeps in a chest and
Right.
her grandchildren discover and publish.
Right.
No, she wants to be read. And so it is like art form, the painters and the like, and the musicians. Why are they doing it? Well, it's kind of a mystery.
And maybe you weren't meant to write in full until you retired. I mean, maybe that
No.
was the universe's plan all along.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting when you say, like, even when you had thought about it, you're like, I don't have any ideas, and then all of a sudden here's this like storage chest of ideas. The
Yeah.
moment you have the free time that were probably there all along, but you were kind of being told you've got to focus on this because this is what's going to pay the bills and this is what's going to maintain the family unit and whatever. And then you retire and like, oh, now I have this. So take me through that a little bit. So you start writing, and it obviously culminates in your recently released collection of short stories, The Continental Divide. When you started writing, was it again just like, I just want to write stories and maybe I'll start
Well,
listing them off?
I have a story about that. So I retire from WSBT TV in South Bend, which was also the CBS affiliate there, and I taught for a semester and a half at the local community college, and I taught these people that had come back to college. They were trying to make something of themselves. They had screwed around in high school, and they want to get an associate degree. They want to get a culinary degree or something like that. And oftentimes they were 30 or 40-year-old women, and those people took it very seriously. They were really trying to make something of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But many of the people were like 19 and they were out of high school and nothing was working for them. So they thought they'd come back to school. And they had financial aid of sorts. I don't know exactly how it worked, but they'd drop out as soon as the aid was used up. So if I had a class of 20 people, it might be six people at the end of the semester.
Right. It's like the Navy SEALs.
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. But it was rough. It was rough work. It was rewarding because of the older people that really took it seriously. But after a while, I woke up one day and I said, "Wait a minute, I'm retired. I can do what I want.
Right.
I have a pension. I have Social Security. I can do what I want." So I'm sitting with friends at a restaurant, at a bar. A lot of my stories revolve around bars,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm lamenting to this young guy that worked for me in the TV station that I wasn't writing. I have this free time and I'm not writing. And there's this bucket of shelled peanuts between us. And he picks up a handful of the peanuts and he says, "Write about these nuts." And it was sort of like a prompt.
Mm-hmm.
It came out of
Totally.
nowhere. It hit me between the eyes. "Write about these nuts." And I went home and I wrote a story called These Nuts. And it was about 5 or 6 pages long, and it was about a kind of a wasted 40-year-old adjunct professor who sort of falls in love with a young bartender waitress who looks like the girl in Uma Thurman.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that story was published last year in Bull Lit magazine, But that's what got me going again, the
Yeah.
story, These Nuts. And
Right.
I never looked back. I never
Yeah.
stopped.
It's just the torrent unleashes. And then obviously it culminates in a book deal. I mean,
Yeah.
which, and we should probably underscore, I mean, the odds. If we think about, a debut author writing literary fiction, short stories, without previous publication experience, getting, a hardcover book deal that gets reviewed in the New York Times. I mean, talk about talk about long odds.
It wasn't hardcover. It was only a paperback. That's the
Okay.
only thing I'll correct you on. But yeah, the odds. And again, I didn't even think about that. I didn't think about the odds.
Yeah.
I
Right.
wrote every story, all 14 stories in my collection I wrote after retirement.
Yeah.
It was only after retirement that I first got published in a now defunct online magazine called Wag's Review.
Okay.
And I published my first story there. It was called Pay the Fish Lady.
Right.
And it's not in the collection, by the way.
Mhm.
But anyway, yeah, what are the odds?
Yeah.
The the publishing house that accepted my book is a small press called Cornerstone Press, and a lot of it is student run.
Hmm.
And the publisher, the professor, a man named Ross Tangadal, loved my book, has loved it ever since, and he really loves it since it got reviewed in the New York Times,
Yeah.
because he's very, very proud that their publishing house is a New York Times reviewed collection.
Right. Totally.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think it's worth underscoring. So, I was kind of researching you yesterday and I saw the Times review and I went and look, because it's, even if you get a bad review in the Times, getting reviewed in the Times is a big deal. I've never been reviewed in the Times, they, and I'm reading this review. I'm like, this is a fucking great review. And it,
I,
and
I said similar things upon reading it. I kept waiting for the paragraph that said, on the other hand, Bob's
right,
sex scenes are no,
right.
it never came.
Right. And you think about the way that they write reviews, sometimes the subtle jabs are just that highly subtle. And even your pull quote that you use for the website, which is probably the one that I would have used, which is think Flannery O'Connor meets Quentin Tarantino. That's not, I mean, that is amazing, but that doesn't necessarily belie a positive review. You look at this, the review is glowing. Yeah, I don't know if there's a better word to say.
I
And that's just it must be, you know, so, and I know, you're not writing to necessarily to be reviewed in the New York Times or to be a New York Times bestseller to sell 1 million copies, which is incredibly difficult to do with a short story collection or any book really. But that just must be on some level so satisfying, and I know you don't rest on those laurels, but just be like, I did that.
it's I Jesse Eisenberg of
Hmm.
the
Right.
actor. He said on CBS Sunday Morning a month or so ago that he's not wired to accept praise.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
I kind of understood that, because when that happened, when the New York Times review happened, and I kept looking for the paragraph that said, on the other hand, these stories fail when they blah, blah, blah,
Right. Right.
and that paragraph never came. Um, I didn't quite know what to do with myself. I
Right.
say to my wife, I don't know what to do with myself. Of course, I was very, very happy. I was very, very astonished by it, and I still am. But that void, that artist's void, is always there to be filled too.
Right.
And I'll say to my wife, after maybe a story gets accepted and I'm very happy, and then maybe a week later I'll tell her I'm peering into the black abyss again. And that black abyss is that I need to fill that void again.
Right.
Now the New York Times though was pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we can underscore that black void isn't necessarily that you're looking for praise or you're looking for a replication of that, but there is something about when you get high level praise or literary criticism that kind of outputs this vulnerability that does almost make you want to seek the darkness again.
Well, and then we're talking imposter syndrome too.
Oh,
I mean,
100%, which never goes away, no matter
me?
who you are as a
Yeah.
writer.
Yeah, me? I mean, I got
Right.
okay. I got this collection. Yeah, okay, but it's a small press, It's really a small press, It's not Doubleday. And then, oh, okay. Well, this story was selected as a story of the year in the Hudson Review. Okay, but the Hudson Review isn't the New Yorker. I mean, I find myself doing that,
100%. Oh my
and
God,
people
that's so
tell me to
relatable.
shut the fuck up
Right,
about. Don't do
right.
that. Yeah.
Totally. Totally.
Hmm.
It's so yeah, you learn over time to just be grateful for what has happened, be excited for what's coming, and then just adhere to the things you love. And I'm so convinced if you do something for the pure joy of it, those good things do come.
I think they do.
As long
I
as
think
you're
they
not
do.
thinking I'm doing this for the good things, you're doing it because you love the thing you're
No,
doing.
exactly. It's
Um,
karma. It's something. It's the cosmos. It's you putting it out there and getting it back. Um, the whole thing about when God closes a door, he opens a window. I don't know. I don't necessarily believe that, but I believe something like that
yeah,
sometimes.
I
That
do too.
if you do it for the right reasons, then you will be abundantly repaid somehow.
Right. And you can see the evidence to the contrary, which is some of my students who, have one book and they won't let it go. It's like, I wrote this thing. What do you mean? I spent all the time and I wrote this. And what do you mean I'm not getting an agent? What do you mean it's not selling? As opposed to, don't you have something else you want to write? Isn't there something else that excites you?
Yeah,
And maybe
for
that
sure.
second book is what's going to do it. But they won't let it go because they feel like they've earned this book to sell. And I'm like, that's not how
No,
the world works. That's not how the
no.
universe works.
Well, I have an agent now because of this publication and because of my good reviews. And my agent, of course, is asking me for a novel. So I have the next thing to work on now.
That's so
You know,
much. But how exciting is that, though?
well, no, it's exciting, except I've got 2,300 words down and 50,000 to go.
Oh,
It's,
at least, at
yeah.
least.
Oh, at least, exactly.
Well, Bob, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a little bit of storytelling on our own. This is the making it up part of the show where I've taken
Okay.
three books. I like to say at random. These aren't totally at random because they're all short story collections in honor of you, off my bookshelf. And you're going to choose one of those, and we're going to choose a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and that'll be the first sentence in a 2 minute long short story.
Oh
So I'll
boy.
read the sentence. You give me a sentence or two. I'll do a sentence or two, and then
Okay.
we'll call it a day. I've got Stephen King's Just After Sunset. This is a friend of mine, Sean Eads, his collection 17 Stitches, which is exceptionally, exceptionally dark. And on the full other end of the spectrum, I have a book that I'm actually excited that I have a story in, R.L. Stein's YA Scream and Scream Again.
Let's do the middle one, the
All right,
exceptionally dark
17
one.
Stitches.
Mhm.
So give me a number between 1 and 280.
216.
Okay, so I'm going to look at page 216. This is from a short story by Sean Eads called "When April Comes Around." Um, this is a great opening line. So you do with this whatever you want.
Okay.
I bought a gun in January, but delayed using it.
Um, and then my mother said, "Boy, get busy."
I'd been around long enough to know exactly what she meant. She didn't mean killing rabbits for dinner. She meant killing something else entirely, the thing we had talked about for months.
She meant Uncle Joe, who lived upstairs for a while and used to beat me for being left-handed.
Mother's voice echoed in my ears as I shuffled my way to the boarding house where Uncle Joe now lived. Don't do this for me, she would always say. Do it for yourself.
And I did it for myself. I walked into the boarding house and Uncle Joe was sitting there in his rocking chair like he always does. He looked up at me. He had this look in his eye that essentially said, "Do it, boy."
And it was hard to tell if that look came from his age, from his miserable experiences, or from the empty drink glass next to him. But I suppose it didn't really matter. I took out the gun, which was heavy in my 13-year-old hand, but not so heavy I couldn't level it directly at his forehead.
And then the nurse came in. She saw me midway through the act. She screamed. I jerked around. The gun went off. I shot myself in the knee.
I think we call it there. That was wonderful. That was rapid fire.
That was fun.
Yeah, it's rare that usually I'll say something and the other person takes a good 10 seconds and you're just like, you got it. You saw it all.
Well, you started with a gun. You started with a gun, and then naturally I had to go to the mother, and it came real easily.
Yeah, isn't that a fun little thing to do? I do it every time. I get nervous every time, but I have fun every time.
Sure.
Bob, what a pleasure to meet you, and just my heartfelt congratulations on the Continental Divide. What a lovely book and an amazing experience for you. And I'm sure not only myself, but the listeners and the viewers are anxiously awaiting to see what the Bob Johnson novel looks like.
Well, tell them to go to bobjohnsonwriter.com and learn more about me.
I will. Absolutely. Thank you for your time and best of luck with everything.
Thank you.
Take care. So that's it. That's my conversation with Bob Johnson. I told you that was a rapid fire storytelling, didn't I? He was just ready to go. He knew what was coming next. That was really fun. His new collection is out, The Continental Divide. Please go read about it and about Bob at his website, which is bobjohnsonwriter.com, and pop on over to carterwilson.com. You can check out my books, check out my blog, sign up for my newsletter, check out other episodes of Making It Up, all that good stuff. Look at my events. And then if you head on over to Unbound Writer for you aspiring writers, you can see all the services I offer, including one-on-one private coaching. That is it, friends. That is it for this episode of Making It Out. Making It Out? Jesus fucking Christ. Making It Up. I normally would re-record that, but I'm not gonna. Another episode will be out just next week. As always, thank you for watching and or listening. Take care.